Cheney, the foreign policy genius who could see invisible WMD and figured out that Iraq would give them away to its best friend al-Qaeda, has new and equally blazing pearls of wisdom about today's redeployment of U.S. troops from patrolling Iraqi streets to providing backup on request. Our fourth story, how much wrong can one Dick Cheney be? His prediction that Americans would be welcomed as liberators? Wrong. We got our parades and flowers today because we left. Yesterday, after General Ray Odierno discussed a recent increase in violence, Cheney got the chance to be right for once. Here is the question he got, and listen for the part about the violence following Obama's withdrawal order.
Last night we heard from General Odierno, and he reports that May had the lowest level of civilian casualties since the war in Iraq began, but there has been a big uptick in the last few weeks since the Obama administration ordered a withdrawal from Iraq. Are we getting out too soon is the question I have for you, sir.
Wrong. The Bush administration ordered the withdrawal. Today's pullback, departure in 2011. Last year they ordered it, but Mr. Cheney allowed that wrong to stand, and instead with that unique gift for spotting intel others miss, he saw in Odierno's words, grave threats ahead.
What he says concerns me. It would look like, one might speculate, that the insurgents are waiting, and as soon as they get an opportunity, they'll begin to launch more attacks. I hope that's not the case. I hope certainly that the Iraqis can deal with it. At some point, they've got to stand on their own, but I would not want to see us waste all the tremendous sacrifice that's gotten us to this point.
Wrong squared. For one thing, sir, you wasted the tremendous sacrifice by making it, by sending hundreds of thousands of troops into harm's way, 4,300 of them never to return, to protect us from WMD, about which you were wrong, to keep them from Iraq's terrorist allies, about whom you were wrong. And as for your fear, quote, that insurgents are waiting and as soon as they get an opportunity, they'll begin to launch more attacks. Did you even hear the question? She specifically said that Odierno reported attacks had already been launched. Insurgents are not waiting for U.S. troops to leave, as Odierno said, and as Mr. Cheney would know if he watched TV, let alone heard the people talking to him. In recent weeks, that uptick of violence has killed hundreds, even with U.S. troops there. With us tonight, Richard Clark, former chief counterterrorism advisor to both the Bush and Clinton presidencies, author most recently of Your Government Failed You, Breaking the Cycle of National Security Disasters, chairman now of Good Harbor Consulting. Great thanks, sir.
Good to be with you, Keith.
Did we just see sort of Cheney, the anatomy of the Cheney intel analysis process? He already knew insurgents would lie in wait and then spring out after the U.S. pulled back. So it didn't even register him that both Odierno and that interviewer just said, you know, the insurgents were not lying in wait. They had already sprung out and already were in action.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The CNN opinion research poll that came out today said 52% of the American people expected there to be an uptick in attacks after the U.S. troops left the cities. It's pretty obvious that that would happen. And what Cheney's doing is really politics here. It's not intelligence analysis. It's the same thing he did on the torture issue. On the torture issue, he said, because Obama stopped torture, if there is another al-Qaeda attack, it will be because of that decision. He's trying to predict disasters, another al-Qaeda attack, more violence in Iraq, and say in advance of these things happening, if they happen, it'll be because of something Obama did. Even though, in this case, it's something that Bush did. As you pointed out, this withdrawal from the cities was something that Bush ordered.
And even in this case, isn't he actually predicting the past? Because this uptick in violence occurred before the troops were pulled out, not by Obama's orders, but by Bush's agreement.
Absolutely. And look, there may be more violence in the next few weeks. There may be a further uptick. That's not the issue. The issue is, what good does it do to keep American troops in the cities? And what is the criteria for when you'll bring them home? Unfortunately, the Obama administration seems to be thinking it's going to keep 130,000 American troops there until after the election sometime in January. So Obama hasn't really made any new courageous decisions here. We're implementing a Bush decision, and the troops have only moved about 5 or 10 miles.
A point that John Hanna, who had been the former national security advisor to Mr. Cheney, made, that if Bush had removed troops from Iraq under fire, he said al-Qaeda and Iran would have been emboldened and American credibility throughout the Middle East would have been lost. Well, it's a good thing Iran wasn't emboldened, and it was a good thing we didn't lose any credibility in the Middle East, right? It would be
hard to imagine Iran more emboldened than it is today. Hard to imagine that al-Qaeda could get more emboldened. Now, this is one of those trite lines that they use so often during the campaign. Iran is going to do what it's going to do. Al-Qaeda is going to do what it's going to do. The United States needs to do what it must do in its own best interest, and that's to get the hell out.
I mentioned before the break the CIA Inspector General's report on prisoner abuse comes out tomorrow. What do you want to know from it? What could it tell us about the need for further investigation?
Well, I think two things it could tell us, and I'd like to know. One, did the interrogations do any good? Did they provide any essential information that stopped terrorist attacks? I'm told the report says there was no intelligence that stopped terrorist attacks as a result of this torture. The second thing is, did the torture go beyond even the Bush administration Justice Department's own guidelines? And again, I think the report will say there were CIA personnel who exceeded the guidelines. And therefore, I think the question's obvious. When are we going to have an investigation?
Richard Clark, the former counterterrorism chief, the National Security Council, author of Your Government Failed You, which is now out in paperback. Richard Clark, as always, great thanks for your time.
Thank you, Keith.